With threats to our nation waiting around every corner, adaptability is more important than ever. When conditions change without notice, quick strategic thinking is crucial. And with obstacles consistently impending, determination is essential in overcoming them. It's this willingness, decisiveness, and resilience that sets Marines apart. With our fighting spirit, we don't just fight battles, we win them. Marines are the constant our nation counts on to fight the unknown. And through adaptable problem solving, we do just that. Learn more at marines.com.
It's only a kick, a jump, a block. It's only a serve. It's only a tackle, a run. It's only for the fans. After all, it's only pressure. You got this. Adidas.
This podcast contains explicit language. If you want to know how explicit, keep listening. Hi, I'm Josh Levin, and this is Hang Up and Listen for the week of April 22nd, 2024. On this week's show, writer Tom Haberstroh will join us to discuss Jontay Porter's lifetime ban from the NBA for gambling and what it augurs for the future of pro sports and betting. Then we'll be joined by The Ringer's Ben Lindbergh to talk about the scourge of pitcher injuries in Major League Baseball and what MLB should do to get the crisis under control. I'm in Washington, D.C. I'm the author of the book The Queen and the host of an upcoming slow burn season on the rise of Fox News and so on and so forth. That's on the official subhead. Also in D.C. is Stefan Fatsis. He's the author of the books Word Freak, A Few Seconds of Panic, and Wild and Outside. He's about to head off to Greece for a while, so be prepared for him to be even more into Greek stuff when he gets back next month. Hello, Stefan.
I'll try to go to a game.
A game of any game?
Game of what?
I don't know. Maybe a soccer game.
A game.
Maybe some other sport. Maybe a team handball game.
A sports game?
See if the Greek league is thriving. Yeah.
Enjoy your sports game.
Thank you.
Is that why you're going?
I'm going to see our daughter who is doing a semester abroad in Thessaloniki, Greece, which is the northern city.
Chloe, I'm jealous.
It's where the great Nick Gallis played basketball.
We remember him from Afterballs of yore. Also with us is a man who Stefan didn't even invite to Greece. Not sure what that's about, but he remains in Palo Alto, and he is Joel Anderson. Hey, Joel.
Hey, not only did I not get invited to Greece, I've never even been to Europe. So I was kind of hoping, Stefan, that maybe I could come along, hang out.
You could maybe catch a game.
But,
maybe.
Yeah, game, whatever, you know.
Maybe a basketball game. Is it Greek basketball season? Oh, you know what I should do? Is go see the Giannis court in Athens.
Oh. I really thought you were going to say the what is it, the Greek Shack, or what was it? What was that the guy's name?
Sophocles or Schwarzenegger. Schwarzenegger. Yeah. The strategic Afterball reserve is going to be so full after this trip. I'm
my
excited.
God.
Now, as always, we want to thank our Slate Plus members for making the show possible, and we want to let you know that in our bonus episode this week, we're going to talk about Caitlin Clark's very big week, from getting drafted number 1 in the WNBA draft, to getting her own Nike shoe, to being the recipient of some very cringy remarks from the Indianapolis Star's Greg Doyle. There's a lot to discuss. If you want to hear it, that bonus episode is available right now. If you don't subscribe, there are 2 ways for you to hear it. You can either subscribe right now by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or you can visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen. The NBA playoffs started this weekend with the biggest storylines being Anthony Edwards smiling in KD's face, every home team winning Game 1, and nearly every series featuring an injured star. Jimmy Butler, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Kawhi Leonard, and Zion Williamson all missing, and Joel Embiid is out there hobbling around, sadly. But we'll get to all of that in due time, meaning not this week. Now we've got a segment on Jontay Porter's lifetime ban from the NBA. But before we start, I just wanted to note that after we recorded the segment, Jontay's brother, Coben Porter, was sentenced to 6 years in prison for killing a woman while driving drunk. After another of the Porter siblings, Michael Porter Jr., scored 19 points in the Nuggets' Game 1 win over the Lakers, Michael told the media, "Some bad and sad stuff happened to a couple of my brothers, but I've got 15, 16 more brothers in here, so I knew I had to be there for them." Okay, now on to our conversation. Last Wednesday, the NBA sent out a rather long press release with the headline, Jontay Porter banned from NBA for violating league's gaming rules. That's gaming, not gambling, but actually, yeah, it is gambling. Porter played for the Toronto Raptors this season, and among the bannable things he did, according to the NBA, is disclose confidential information about his own health to a gambler. Separately, a known associate of Porter's placed an $80,000 prop bet to win $1.1 million with an online sportsbook. That bet got frozen, so the $1.1 million in winnings was not acquired. But that bettor was gambling essentially on Porter having a bad game. And in that game, Porter only played 3 minutes, claiming that he felt ill. There's a lot more to this that we'll get into, but first I'm going to bring in Tom Haberstroh. He's been writing about the Porter case for his excellent newsletter, The Finder. You can also read and listen to him on Yahoo Sports, on the Count the Dings podcast. And if you're into Top Chef, the show Pack Your Knives. Tom, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
In addition to what I just laid out, the NBA also says that Porter bet on 13 NBA games, including 3 bets on his team, the Raptors, to lose. Out of all these allegations, what stood out to you the most when you read about it?
Well, first, the $80,000 parlay bet on a Jontay Porter prop bet. So a prop bet is not your normal bet. A prop bet is every game, sportsbooks offer the ability to wager on a player's stat line. So whether you're LeBron James, Michael Porter Jr., or his younger brother, Jontay Porter Jr., there are these statistical thresholds that they have to hit. So will Jontay Porter have 7.5 points, or over 7.5 points, or under 7.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, 0.53 pointers? And what Jontay Porter allegedly did that the NBA is banning him for is someone in his circle, an associate of his, bet or tried to lay down an $80,000 parlay prop bet, meaning not only was he betting that maybe Jontay Porter would hit the under on his points, but also his rebounds and also his 0.53 pointers, which has a multiplier effect. And if you've been to a horse track, a trifecta box or a trifecta, that is essentially what they were trying to do, was to make an $80,000 bet on a fringe NBA player's stat line and then multiplied it times 3. So the payout would have been $1.1 million. And that raised tons of flags, obviously, because these sort of bets are only about like $8. You might bet $8 or $15 because it's a fringe NBA player. But then here comes $80,000 bet on this, and the idea that this associate of Jontay Porter or Jontay Porter would not have realized that this is going to get caught so fast just speaks to how sloppy this operation was. And when you're betting on your team to lose, that doesn't sit well with anybody that's in competitive sports. And it also is incredibly interesting to me that the NBA put that in the press release, that he bet on his team to lose. And not only that, it was a bad bet because the Raptors won the game. So not only are you breaking the rules, but you are a terrible gambler.
You're a terrible gambler, but the implication might have been that if Jontay Porter was a better player or a more important player on this team, and he bet on his team to lose, he could have influenced that. That's a more traditional point-shaving sort of operation. We don't know all the details yet. You know, this feels like a preliminary investigation. We also haven't heard from Porter or his lawyers or his agent. So who knows what other sneakers are going to drop here. But the tip of the iceberg, it feels to me, Tom, is that scenario. Like, look, this is kind of perfect for Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA. Jontay Porter is a marginal player. We can make an example of him with a lifetime ban. But there is a risk here that someone more influential and better in the NBA could get caught up in something like this, isn't there?
Yes, Stefan, when you talk about what Adam Silver said in that press release, this is why we have legalization of sports betting, is that we can catch these guys when they do something like this. But I also think about the other side of this, is like, if there is an NBA player who is addicted to gambling, like it appears I'm no doctor or no psychologist, but it appears that Jontay Porter was addicted to gambling because if you already know that this is illegal and you're still doing this, you can't help yourself but do this, or you're just greedy, whatever, what have you. If I'm an NBA player, I know that there are illegal markets where I can place these bets. And it doesn't take long for these NBA players to find those black markets or underground markets to place these bets if you really want to place them. We know this because of the Shohei Ohtani story, where there are illegal bookies who are willing to take money from people with deep pockets. So one thing that I think about with this story is how many other NBA players are so competitive or addicted to gambling or addicted to that side of the dopamine rush or the action. How do they respond to Jontay Porter being banned for life? Do they stop or do they try to get more sophisticated? Because if you look at the way that this operation was pulled out, it wasn't very sophisticated. And so by making an example out of him in some ways, to me, makes me wonder about, how widespread is this? And is he the only NBA player who's doing this? I don't know. But I will say that the Action Network report from this month is also very alarming, and we haven't gotten to the bottom of that, which is there is a report from the Action Network that is claiming that Jontay Porter had been placing thousands of wagers and millions of dollars in Colorado. Where's Colorado? That's where Michael Porter Jr. plays basketball. And where is he getting the money for thousands of bets, millions of dollars worth of bets? I don't know. But there's that report floating out there, and it also was not addressed in the NBA investigation. And the NBA did not clear or address Michael Porter Jr. in this or say and we also interviewed Michael Porter Jr. He has been cleared of any wrongdoing. So to your point about this is the preliminary stage, I can guarantee you that this is not the last we've heard of Jontay Porter.
Maybe he was stealing the money from Shohei Ohtani's translator. You never know.
Tom, so it's interesting we're talking about this now because I was just... not long before we got on here, I was watching a clip of Jamal Crawford talking on the Pivot podcast about how he once gambled so much money in a dice game that he had to give his car away to a local Chicago guy, right? The legend was that he lost it to Michael Jordan, but he said the real story is I lost it to some street guy. So that does speak a lot as to how competitive these guys are and everything else. And I'm just kind of in the broader sense here, is that this is always sort of why these professional sports leagues took such a hard line on gambling, right? Because it's these guys are insanely competitive, and they've got sort of addictive personalities to be great and to excel in basketball in the way you've got to sort of have a personality that allows you to do things over and over and over again. So I'm just wondering if this I guess if what is happening now is just sort of what the NBA always sort of suspected might happen if we open the floodgates like this.
Yeah, so the opening essay I did for TomTheFinder.com, my Substack, was the headline is "The NBA is saying trust us, and should we?" And the reason why I made that my opening essay is because this wasn't very long ago that the NBA was arguing in the courts against legalized gambling because it would pose irreparable harm to the sport. This feels like to me, a money grab that the NBA is recognizing that there's so much money to be had in gambling and partnerships with different sports books. And maybe if people are all addicted to gambling on NBA games, they'll watch more NBA games. And we do know research that people who have action or skin in the game are more likely to watch that game. Then maybe that'll help the revenues in the sport too. So it's really difficult to separate the two. Hey, we're going to go all in on gambling. And every fan, when they're watching a game, is going to have a DraftKings opportunity to bet on DraftKings in the game in the NBA League Pass app. But also say this is so horrible that we can't let any NBA players do it. And you're okay to gamble on other things, but not on NBA stuff. It seems like it's a very fine line that we're walking here. And Jontay Porter crossed that line and did it apparently multiple times, placing at least 13 bets. Caveat, at least 13 bets the NBA found that he had wagered on NBA games. And, Stefan, what you talked about is what happens if it's a bigger name. Do we know what it would look like? And I certainly hope the NBA would catch that before it got out of control. But we also know that Tim Donaghy was operating for 4 years, betting on games without the NBA knowing about it. So that's one of the misconceptions about the Tim Donaghy scandal. The NBA referee is he was betting on NBA games, on his NBA games for 4 years before the FBI found out about it, and before the NBA then found out about it. So let's hope that Jontay Porter is the poster boy to this and the sacrificial lamb, and no other NBA player will get the idea. But just based on history, this probably isn't the last scandal we're dealing with here.
This is a little bit of an aside, but the idea that this is just the kind of red letter example of a thing that's going to get flagged by the private groups that are monitoring this stuff, by the league office itself, just this idea that you're going to bet $80,000 in a parlay on Jontay Porter. It's just like nobody would ever do that unless they had information. And so I was thinking back on the Alabama baseball gambling scandal where the Alabama baseball coach ended up getting fired. What he did was he told someone that the starting pitcher in the game wasn't going to pitch because he was hurt. And this is all like written out in like a complaint. Like this is all like documented by investigators. What happened then is that the guy who was betting on that information said the following. He goes to like the sportsbook window and says, his bet is for sure going to win. And if only you guys knew what I knew. So at the very least, we're performing like an educational service of like how not to get caught and like the exact dumb things not to say when you're placing a bet. But I mean, what we know, Tom, is that whether it's tennis or any other sport, the players that are most vulnerable are the ones in the minor leagues, or the ones that make the least amount of money. Maybe that's like actually a comforting story for the NBA. It's like, the stars, the players that everybody knows aren't going to get involved in this. And yet we still wonder, why would somebody who has an NBA contract, why would somebody who has a rich brother, why would somebody risk it all for something so dumb and for, something that's just clearly going to get you banned?
Well, what's interesting about the NBA now is that some of the players are making $50 million a year. They're making $50 million a year, which makes them a business unto themselves. And this is an important piece of the whole puzzle, because if you're LeBron James, or if you're Steph Curry, or Luka Doncic, Anthony Davis, you can afford to pay a personal trainer or a massage therapist or a manager, 3 agents, a financial advisor, and they're all with you all the time. Your associates are now getting larger and harder to keep track of. And imagine if LeBron James...
translator.
Exactly. A translator who has access to all of your financial information. Imagine if like that trainer or that strength coach, your personal trainer's personal strength coach, who isn't employed by the NBA, they're just employed by you, the player. If they find out, hey, such and such player isn't going to play tonight, and it's not public information, that associate could act upon that information. Or if I know that my client just went out real late the night before and he's going to be all hungover for this game and he's going to have the quote unquote South Beach flu, that information can also be acted upon. So I think it's important to note in this Jontay Porter story, it is not just about Jontay Porter. It's about his associates and disclosing inside information to associates to influence the game or influence them, motivate them to bet on the under. And to be clear here, the NBA was talking about the March 26th, end of March game, in which he called out sick after the first quarter. I wrote about it on TomTheFinder.com, where he literally, after that play to end the first quarter, he's walking off the floor holding his belly like a cartoon character. And that was the game in question where he placed an under bet, or his associates were placing an under bet, and then he called out sick halfway through the game. But there was another game that ESPN reported earlier that there was a lot of action, suspicious betting activity in a January game. That January game was not mentioned in the NBA press release. I don't know why, but whether they wanted to get this out before they fully investigated both of those games, but DraftKings put out 2 notices to its betting community saying that on the January game, it was the biggest winner of the night. And then the March game, it was the biggest winner of the night. I wonder why the January 20 or the January game wasn't a part of the NBA report, but it does show that like whatever happened in that January game, it wasn't enough to stop everything. 2 months went by before another incident happened, and then it became public information. So what happened after that first one? We don't really know. Did the NBA know? And so those are some of the questions that I'm still wondering is, okay, how far does this go? Like Michael Porter Jr., is there any evidence that he was associated? Because it's his brother. You would want to know that. And then secondly, what happened in that January game? We're hearing a lot about the March game, but what about the January game? And so, yeah, still more questions to be answered.
There's a Casablanca, I think, parallel here. This is like the NBA is going to stand up and say, we are doing everything we can to stamp out gambling in this establishment. And the concern for the league seems to me to be one of a sort of accumulated anger, not just among fans or bettors or whomever, newspaper columnists, but among players and coaches. I mean, we've already seen J.B. Bickerstaff, the coach of the Cavaliers, say that his family has been threatened by gamblers, and Tyrese Halliburton of the Pacers say that he feels like a prop. We saw Rudy Gobert get fined $100,000 for, rubbing his fingers together in the money sign at a ref and getting a tee during a game, implying that there might be shenanigans going on involving crooked referees. I mean, the slope is unbelievably slippery here. And that's not even to mention, to say that we've had suspensions in the NFL and the NHL. NFL front office executive got 6 months in prison for embezzling money to feed his gambling addiction. Is this ultimately, the NBA brought in over $150 million from gambling revenue last year because of its associations. These leagues are going to be reluctant to back away from all of that. But is there a tipping point where this accumulated frustration or anger leads the league to do more than say, we got to stamp out prop bets on players?
It's a great question. I would pose it to you guys. Do you think that this Jontay Porter did anything to dissuade people from betting on NBA games? I would guess very little. It's a big scandal in my eyes, but I don't think it's going to move the needle for NBA bettors to be like, you know what, actually, the Jontay Porter thing, the game's tainted. I can't feel confident in these bets anymore. So your question is what level are we talking here? Is this a crisis? I think it's a ticking time bomb. And I also think that there's another piece of this story that I've been writing about. The NBA halfway through the season decided they were going to cut back on foul calls. And Adam Silver just the other day said, yep, we decided to make a bit of a adjustment on the NBA refereeing, and it amounted to 2 free throws per team per game. And I'm sitting there being like, whoa, mid-season, the NBA decided to wipe away 4 fouls per game, which yields on average, let's just call it ballpark, 7 free throws. And if 7 free throws have an average scoring opportunity of 0.8 per free throw, you can see pretty clearly how eliminating 4 fouls per game can adjust the over-under totals on a game by as much as 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 points per game. And that's what you saw, is that mid-season scoring dropped by as much as 11 points per game. And that's important because NBA fans can bet on the over-unders on games, the exact thing that they were changing mid-season. What if there was someone, not talking about an interpreter here, but But what if someone in the league office or someone associated with referees had found out that overnight they're going to just stop calling as many foul calls and swallowing the whistle more? And in Vegas, what did you see afterwards? People who were betting the unders on the NBA over-under totals for the point total for the games were winning at 70% success rate. The unders were hitting at an alarmingly high rate. So, yeah, the Jontay Porter thing is alarming, but there's other shapes of influence that I think people need to remember is that if NBA referees are going to change how they officiate games on the fly without having everyone knowing about it, there's inside information that people could act on, and that's also really unsettling.
So we've referred to Jontay Porter a lot here as Michael Porter's brother. And I'm just sort of curious, had you noticed anything about his career prior to this? Like, had there any reason that he had ever appeared on your radar? And the last question I have for him is, do you think, I mean, he's obviously not going to play in the NBA again. Do you think that there is a chance that he'll even be able to play basketball abroad somewhere? Because, I mean, this is a pretty big stain to follow you, too.
Yeah, Jontay Porter was known to most people as Michael Porter's little brother, too. So, yes, he was a fringe NBA player who had a lot of injuries in college and had a tough time staying healthy. But to your question about whether he was going to be able to survive this in his professional basketball career, I think he would if it wasn't so brazen and sloppy and a show of your judgment. The way that he placed these bets or the way that he operated this scheme just hits so many alarms for any employer that I think it's really tough to imagine him playing professional basketball again, because I think his betting behavior wasn't just about like, hey, I'm afraid that this guy is going to manipulate outcomes in the game. I just don't know if I can trust this guy.
You can read Tom Haberstroh, very trustworthy guy, at tomthefinder.com. We'll put links to his stories about Jontay Porter on our show page. Tom, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Up next, The Ringer's Ben Lindbergh on the scourge of pitcher injuries and what to do about them. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, while you're listening, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you can be doing right now. Getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy, and you could save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $750 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles on your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join the more than 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you're driving, cooking, or doing laundry, Progressive knows the podcasts you listen to go best when they're bundled with another activity, much like how their Progressive home and auto policies go best when they're bundled. Having these two policies together makes taking care of your insurance easier and could help you save too. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. That's a whole lot of savings and protection for your favorite podcast listening activities, like going on a road trip, cooking dinner, and even hitting the gym. Yep, your home and your car are even easier to protect when you bundle your insurance together. Find your perfect combo. Get a home and car insurance quote at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary.
When the Los Angeles Angels signed reliever Robert Stevenson to a 3-year, $33 million contract in January, the team included a clause. If Stevenson missed 130 straight days because of an elbow ligament injury, the Angels could keep him for a 4th year at the discounted rate of $2.5 million. Good clause! Last week, Stevenson was removed from his first appearance of the year in the minors, where he was rehabbing a shoulder injury, after just 4 pitches because of elbow discomfort. He is expected to have surgery and miss the season. Just before he and a bunch of other pitchers went down, including Shane Bieber of Cleveland and Spencer Strider of Atlanta, our friend Ben Lindbergh wrote his latest installment about the scourge of baseball elbow injuries for The Ringer, where he is a senior editor and writes in podcasts about baseball, television shows, and video games. Hey, Ben.
Hey, yeah, it was just before a flurry of injuries. It was also just after a flurry of injuries, lest you credit me with too much prescience. We're just always between the latest cluster. It was probably during
a flurry of injuries.
Yeah, it's sort of never ending at this point.
All right, the 3 guys I just mentioned, also Jonathan Loaizaga of the Yankees, Yuri Perez of Miami, Trevor Gott of Oakland, all down with elbow ligament injuries in just the first 2 weeks of the season. Only the names change, Ben, but what's different this season is that Major League Baseball seems to want to do something about it. Fill us in.
So to its credit, to some credit at least, MLB started last October an inquiry into elbow injuries. I say to some credit because this could have started, say, 20 years ago, maybe, because the roots of this problem go back that far at least. But they are attempting to get to the bottom of why this is happening, at least. And so they've been sort of in a fact-finding, information-gathering, interview-conducting phase for several months now, predating this latest panic about pitcher elbow injuries. They've done over 100 interviews, just talking to various people at all levels of the game who would have some insight into this issue. And at some point, this season, this year, probably, they haven't exactly said when, they will then transition to more of a formal task force that will take their findings and hopefully convert that into some concrete recommendations for how this problem can be addressed. So you never know with a task force. Sometimes it's just, hey, let's look like we're doing something about the problem. But it certainly seems like they recognize that this is one of the bigger problems confronting MLB and that they want to do something about it to the extent that something can be done.
You know, Ben, I was sort of interested to see, so the MLB is now studying this issue, right? They've been looking into the issue of pitcher injuries. And what's just sort of weird to me is that given how competitive these teams are and these franchises are, I assume that data would have been out there already, or that people would have been looking at this issue. Like, what could the MLB possibly get or turn up that these teams haven't already tried to turn up over the last decade or so, or even longer, I'm imagining.
Yeah, it seems like what they're trying to do is take the model that was mostly successful for them last season, where they've targeted what are the things that people don't like about how baseball is played, and the strikeouts and the lack of balls in play and the lack of base running, etc. Let's gather some data on what fans actually want baseball to look like, and then let's come up with some ways that we can make it look more like that. And then we will test it at the minor league levels, and then we will gradually, eventually implement it at the major league level. They're trying to do sort of the same thing here, but for injuries. And it's similar in the sense that pitchers and teams have their own incentives, which are not necessarily aligned with the leagues or with fans as a whole. If we stipulate that this is a bad thing for baseball, that pitchers are constantly breaking now, we understand why it is to some extent that pitchers, they want to throw hard because throwing hard makes you better, at least until you break. Thus, teams are also trying to develop pitchers who can throw hard. And there needs to be someone who steps in and says, you can't do this anymore, which is really the role of a league, of a commissioner, to change the conditions, change the rules, and say, actually, it's no longer advantageous to train this way. That's the only way that this is going to end, because you can understand from players and teams' perspectives how we got here. So you need someone else to step in and say, well, we have to go somewhere else now. And you're right. It's not a new issue. It's not even something we're newly aware of. Justin Verlander recently referred to this pitcher injury problem as a pandemic, which is perhaps a slight exaggeration. Many people have called it an epidemic. But the existential threat to the species that I would compare but not equate it to is climate change, where we know the temperature is rising, but many Americans manage to put that out of their minds until there's a cluster of extreme weather events, at which point we realize that those are becoming more common and that seems bad and we should try to do something about it. So in this analogy, the rising temperature is rising fastball velocity, and the cluster of extreme weather events is a cluster of elbow injuries, which is what we've had lately. So this is the latest flare-up, and it's really featured more prominent pitchers than some previous flare-ups, which is something that I think has caused it to come to even greater attention.
So to extend that analogy perhaps past the breaking point, the ligament tearing point.
Yes.
A city can build a seawall, right? There are actions that an individual team can take. And you kind of argue pretty convincingly that for all the talk from the MLB Players Association about it's the pitch clock's fault, for all the talk about workloads, whether pitchers pitch too much or too little, that this is really a velocity issue, that it's pitchers throwing at max effort over and over and over again being the issue. So back to the seawall question, is this something where an individual team, let's say the Yankees, decide, you know what, we're going to have our pitchers not throw as hard, or we're going to target pitchers that don't throw it, that just naturally don't throw as hard. Would there be a competitive advantage to be gained from having a more durable pitching staff that on a per pitch basis wasn't as good?
If only I'd come up with this climate change analogy when I was working on my article. It works so well. But I think that there is some chance that could work. You could say everyone is training in this way to maximize their short-term results and throwing max effort as hard as they can, and therefore they don't last as long, but they kind of burn bright, right? But then they fade out early. And so you could say, well, why not take the opposite tack? Maybe these teams are overlooking a bunch of guys who throw 88 miles per hour and they're less likely to break. And so if we can find those guys and we can put a staff together of them, then we could thrive, while everyone else, they have the guys who throw 100, but then those guys get hurt and suddenly you're 20 pitchers down the depth chart. I think that's possible, but it is somewhat speculative and it would be somewhat risky to commit your entire organization to that strategy.
You could devote a minor league team to that strategy. But also, I just want to interject and say that you get an advantage if pitchers are injured a lot because you don't have to pay them as much.
Yes.
So would you then have to pay your durable staff more money? Do you get an advantage by having quality pitchers that get injured and then you suppress their salaries? I mean, it's pretty gross to think of it that way, but
no, there's research that's shown that that's the case, that it has, whether that was something teams were intending to do or not, it might be one reason why they might not mind it as much as others, because you have to throw the same number of innings in a season, but you're distributing those innings over many more pitchers, and they're all sort of anonymous and they don't last very long, and you don't have to pay them as much. It's true. You just sort of shuffle and cycle them in and out. But I think there is possibly some competitive advantage. Maybe it comes back around that way. I'd love for that to be the case. It's just that, people point to Kyle Hendricks, let's say, Cubs pitcher, who's not doing so well now, but had a run where he was really great without throwing as hard as everyone else. Well, he has sort of top of the scale elite command, and so he's able to make that work. That's his outlier trait. And not everyone has that. And a lot of guys throw 88 and they just get pounded, right? So the problem is that we can quantify really well how much it helps you to throw pitches harder, and we can break that down. We can say, look, a fastball in this band of velocity, it's more effective on average than fastballs in this band of velocity, and everyone knows that, and you can see that. And this idea that you're proposing, that I'd love for it to be true, there's a little less data, because we do have some indication that, throwing hard, throwing toward the top of your personal range, that makes you more susceptible to injuries. But it's not a guarantee. There are hard throwers who don't get hurt. There are soft tossers who do get hurt. And so to commit yourself to that course and possibly passing up all of these flamethrowers that actually do make you better as long as they last, that would be kind of risky. I'd love to see it. Someone would write a book about it if it worked. Maybe me.
It's also a food chain issue, isn't it too, Ben? Because this isn't a problem that starts at AA or in the majors. It's a problem that starts when kids are 9 years old. Wow, look at how fast that kid throws. Look at the spin he puts on his curveball. And those traits are rewarded in middle school and high school and at the college level and in the low minors and in all of these travel programs and training camps and private facilities where kids learn to pitch and throw faster than they threw last year. How often do you see social media posts from the companies that train pitchers saying, hey, last year he was at 93.2 and look at him now, he's at 94.1 after just 6 short weeks of training in the off season. So the incentive for everybody is to continue this system because A, as you point out, it works. And B, from a player's perspective, it works, and it might be better in the long run for me to get my one contract in the majors that sets me up for life. And you know what? If I have to have a ulnar collateral ligament surgery, it's part of the deal now.
Yeah, you mentioned Shane Bieber of the Cleveland Guardians. He's in his contract year now, which is not great news for him because he's missing the rest of the season. But prior to the season, he went to Driveline Baseball, the facility where people often go to get their fastball speeds up. And that's helped a lot of careers. But in his case, he was able to get his speeds up heading into this walk year. And he broke, right? And whether he broke because of that or not, we don't know necessarily. But if he had managed to get through this season and been effective as he was before he got injured, well, then he could have cashed in, right? He could have signed some huge deal. And if he broke next year instead, well, not his problem financially, at least, right? So there are all of these incentives that have led us to this situation. And you're right, it starts really young. It starts with radar guns in Little League. It starts with showcase events where anyone who wants to be anyone has to go and throw in front of radar guns and TrackMan devices, and everything they do is monitored and quantified. And of course they want to show out and they want to pump up the gas a little more and reach back for a little extra. And that puts wear and tear on your arm that can be cumulative. We're seeing more and more amateur pitchers get Tommy John surgeries or other UCL replacement, reconstruction, repair surgeries. And it's no longer a guarantee that your new, fresh ligament will last that long either. The breaks between those surgeries have shortened too. So it's tough because at every level, people are going to emulate what the major leaguers are do if they aspire to be that themselves one day. And so in a sense, maybe it has to start at the top and trickle down, but it might take a generation for the effects of that to really be reflected.
In the course of your reporting here, I was wondering if this situation with the pitcher injuries reminded you at all of the problem with NFL running backs, and that the position has been devalued so much on the premise that they're going to get hurt anyway, and it's we can get a bunch of people to do that sort of a job. In fact, I always like to, I can't name drop, but one of my best friends used to work in Major League Baseball, and he always used to say about pitchers, they're all going to get hurt anyway. So it was just sort of built in to the equation, right? So I'm wondering, we just talked about the lower leagues, because in football, for instance, a lot of guys, that are great athletes where they would have been running backs, they say, no, you play receiver, go play, whatever, defensive back, because the odds are if you play running back, you're never going to get to see a true value. So have you heard about anything in terms of the lower levels, people trying to adjust to compensate for the injury risk and the devaluation of the position?
Yeah, I think it's analogous in the sense that individual pitchers might be devalued in the way that individual running backs have been, but I think it's dissimilar in the sense that someone has to pitch, right? Whereas in football, you can throw the ball instead, you don't have to give the ball to the running back. But in baseball, it's just the way the sport is structured. Someone has to throw those innings. So we can't really have people say, I don't want to pitch. I mean, maybe players will be less likely to gravitate toward pitching. I suppose long-term that's possible. But if you want to have a game, as long as it's not, coach pitch or T-ball or something, right? You have to have someone out there standing on the mound. And that's kind of the conundrum for baseball. There's no neat way around it. And there are a lot of negative effects of this, aside from the fact that, guys are having to go under the knife and having to repair at rehab. And, there's no guarantee that they'll come back at the same level. But from a spectator perspective, you just can't count on anyone anymore. You can get invested in a position player, in a hitter. You can say, wow, I can't wait to watch this guy for the next 10, 15, 20 years. I'm having a harder time than ever having that feeling about pitchers, where a young phenom pitcher comes along. And whereas with hitters, we look at, gosh, he runs so fast and he hits the ball so hard. And with pitchers, I have done a 180 now, where it used to be that I was super excited if someone was throwing triple digits. Now it just scares me. I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm waiting for the ligament to snap when I see those readings. So we're almost rooting against excellence in a way that I think is not really conducive to enjoying the sport. And it does feel like you can't count on any particular pitcher. I don't want to exaggerate. Not every pitcher gets hurt, but it does feel like more and more often the fortunes of a team and a season just hang on whether that UCL snaps or not.
Your suggestion in your piece, Ben, is to have roster limits on pitchers, which is an indirect way to get at the problem, since it seemingly would be impossible to enforce a speed limit on pitching. I'm not even sure how you would go about that. But the idea is fewer pitchers on the roster, maybe even fewer or less ability to bring pitchers up from the minors. You're kind of just stuck with the guys you have. That would mean they would have to pitch longer in games and would have to regulate themselves. You analogize it to a restrictor plate in NASCAR, just this idea that if you have to be out there longer, you can't give max effort on every pitch. And it seems reasonable to me, but it's really funny that you brought up the T-ball coach pitch thing, because I was thinking, like, my last question here, and a thing that you guys might laugh at or probably should laugh at, is actually, we're talking about automated strike zones. Is there a version of baseball where there is no pitcher? Is that a plausible future? Like, it's that the fact that question needs to be asked, I think, is pretty bracing. But like, could there be a point where something like robotic or bionic? I mean, it seems ridiculous to even say it, but like, that's kind of where my head went.
Yeah, not ideal, because 55% of Major League Baseball players last year were pitchers. So if the solution is let's Thanos snap our way out of this problem, then that's
the MLBPA might have a few words to say about this.
That
idea.
too, yeah. I mean, technologically, it is somewhat feasible, because something else I've written about is that there's a new generation of pitching machines that claim to and seem to be able to replicate pitchers' stuff with greater accuracy than ever. And, teams have these setups now where you can train against a particular pitcher. I mean, some players do it in VR, for instance. You just put on a headset and you're watching some facsimile of the pitcher you're about to face in the game. But they have pitching machines now where you can see the ball kind of being delivered out of a video backdrop that looks like that pitcher and mirrors that pitcher's release point. And then the stuff is, down to the centimeter or millimeter or whatever, is perfectly calibrated to match the speed and spin and location and pitch selection of the pitcher you're about to face. So in theory, yeah, you could say this is not to prepare to face the actual pitchers. These are the pitchers now, welcome our new robot pitching machine overlords. But I hope that we can avoid that eventuality. That seems drastic, obviously. And yeah, I mean, my proposed solution seems counterintuitive, because pitching is bad for you, clearly. And I'm suggesting, why don't we have these pitchers pitch more and throw more pitches and throw more innings? But I think this whole problem is counterintuitive, because we thought that we were doing a good thing by limiting the workloads. And obviously in earlier eras, that was an issue too. The Doc Goodening of young pitchers, where they would just accrue enormous workloads. You saw shoulder injuries more often back then, because those are more related to overuse. And now teams, they have treated pitchers with kid gloves, which I think the impulse behind that was sound. Let's not overwork these young pitchers. But it turns out that by lowering the workloads and encouraging pitchers to just throw max effort all the time, because, hey, you're not expected to go deep into a game, so just air it out immediately. And it turns out that throwing fewer pitches at max effort is probably worse for you than throwing more pitches at less than your max effort. And so that solution, which maybe sounds like sort of a double bank shot idea, but I think it would work. Just limit the number of pitchers on the active roster. Each guy has to go deeper into games. They're conditioned to train that way. They take a little off. You train a generation of pitchers to prepare that way. And ultimately, we go back to, not everyone just finishing what they started and being workhorses and taking the ball, going the distance, but a little bit closer to that, more of a happy medium might be the way out of this problem.
Ben Lindbergh is a polymath. He's a senior editor at The Ringer. He writes about baseball, TV, video games, co-hosts a podcast called Button Mash about some of those culture things. He's also the co-host of the baseball podcast Effectively Wild at Fangraphs, and he's co-authored 2 books. The Only Rule Is It Has to Work and The MVP Machine. Always a pleasure, Ben.
Apple Card is the perfect cashback rewards credit card. You earn up to 3% daily cash on every purchase, every day. That's 3% on your favorite products at Apple, 2% on all other Apple Card with Apple Pay purchases, and 1% on anything you buy with your titanium Apple Card or virtual card number. Visit apple.co/card calculator to see how much you can earn. Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch, subject to credit approval. Terms apply.
At Bet365, we don't do ordinary. We believe that every sport should be epic. Every home run, every hit, every inning, every play. From the moments that are legendary to the ones that fly under the radar. Whether it's a walk-off grand slam or a base hit to center field. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. 21 plus only. Must be physically located in Virginia. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Can you set the stage a little bit so people understand what happened?
In 1969, 14 black student athletes were kicked off their university's American football team for planning a show of support against racism.
We were really protesting our treatment on the field.
Amazing Sports Stories from the BBC World Service tells their story.
We became brothers that day when you did that to us.
We made a change.
Fighting for what we deserve.
Search for Amazing Sports Stories wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Now it is time for Afterballs, sponsored by Bennett's Prune Juice, endorsed by Kenny Sailors, who says it was okay. So this is going to be the second time in a month that I've, if only briefly, tried to send a little spotlight over toward Mississippi Valley State University, which, great. Archie Cooley, the black college football legend known as Gunslinger, died last week at the age of 84. Cooley is probably best known for being the architect of the record-setting Satellite Express offense in the 1980s, with Willie Satellite Totten at quarterback and a lightly recruited in-state receiver from just outside of Starkville named Jerry Rice. Those years were the high point for Cooley and Mississippi Valley State football, which started the revolution of offensive football with their 5-wide receiver, no-huddle offense during a time when many schools believed in 3 yards and a cloud of dust. Their peak was 1984, when Mississippi Valley State came as close as it ever has to winning the conference title in the SWAC. They finished 9-2, right behind rival Alcorn State. And that season, the Delta Devils won games by scores of 86-0, 77-15, 71-6, and 83-11, averaging 60.9 points per game, and that's a record that still exists at the FCS Division I AA level today. Mississippi Valley State made its only Division I AA playoff appearance that year, losing 66-19 to Louisiana Tech in the first round. But that year made legends out of Totten, Rice, and Coach Cooley, who came to also be known for wearing a cowboy hat with a feather in it on the sidelines. Unfortunately, it would never be so good again for Cooley or Mississippi Valley State. Cooley left Mississippi Valley State after the 1986 season and took over at Arkansas Pine Bluff, school where I've got a little bit of affection, and he led that program from the NAIA into the SWAC. He then spent 1 season at Norfolk State in 1993 before leaving coaching. And he returned in 2000 with Paul Quinn College in Dallas, helping to launch the football program there. And I even had a chance to interview him there briefly. And he didn't say much. He was a man of a few words by that time. But he was taking on the monumental task of starting a football program from scratch at a school with very few resources. I remember thinking as I was there, how in the hell can Paul Quinn afford this? And the answer is they couldn't. By 2007, Paul Quinn had given up on football and turned its football field into an organic farm. But that same year, Cooley, who also played on both sides of the ball at his alma mater, Jackson State, in the early 1960s, was inducted into the SWAC Hall of Fame. I lost touch with him in recent years, and, it seemed like he was mostly, one of those football legends showing up at games, being at all the banquets and events, but he never was on the sidelines again. But it's important to remember that the passing revolution of football doesn't happen without Archie Gunslinger Cooley. Don't believe all the hype. It wasn't just Don Coryell or Miles Davis or June Jones. Archie Cooley was right there with him. So, Stefan, what is your Archie Cooley?
In March, Josh and I watched his alma mater, Brown, blow a 6-point lead in the last 27 seconds to lose to Yale 62-61 in the Ivy League men's basketball tournament final. One of Yale's best players that day was 7-foot sophomore Danny Wolf, who had 9 points, 13 rebounds, and 4 blocks. For Brown, 6'8" sophomore Kalu Anya scored 12 points and pulled down 7 boards. 6'8" junior Nana Owusu-Anane had an off game, but he was a monster the day before with 19 and 15 in Brown's huge upset of regular season champs Princeton. Since then, 13-seed Yale took down 4-seed Auburn in the first round of the NCAA tournament, and the 3 players I just mentioned all entered the transfer portal. On Saturday, Wolf committed to Michigan. Also last week, Ivy League Rookie of the Year Malik Mack left Harvard for Georgetown, and Penn freshman Tyler Perkins defected to Philly Big Five rival Villanova. Those 5 players were the Ivy League's 2 best freshmen, 2 of its best sophomores, and 1 of its best juniors. 6 other players with Ivy League eligibility also are in the portal. So that's 11 players total, up from just 3 last year. Penn's Jordan Dingle, the Ivy Player of the Year, who was part of a transfer parade to St. John's, and 2 marginal guys. It's the biggest talent drain ever from the league, and another canary in the coal mine for college sports. The Ivy League has tried to position itself as above the fray. Attending one of its 8 member schools, the mantra goes, is a 40-year decision, not a 4-year one. After Malik Mack entered the portal, a Harvard flack told the student newspaper The Crimson, quote, "The choice of Harvard for varsity athletes is one that prioritizes the quality of the education and degree they earn. The network of alumni, Harvard name, and the education received are among compelling reasons to be a student athlete at Harvard." But the exodus of top players shows that there are hundreds of thousands of compelling reasons not to be an Ivy athlete, that the diploma and the cachet actually aren't priceless for everyone. I talked to Richard Kent, a Connecticut lawyer who creates name, image, and likeness programs for schools and also calls Yale basketball games on the radio. He estimated that Mack, Wolf, Perkins, and Dingle each are banking mid-6 figures a year at their power schools, with Mack at the high end. So how much did Harvard, Yale, and Penn, which have combined endowments of more than $110 billion, offer to keep these academically qualified and athletically gifted students on their prestigious campuses? Nothing, not a dime. The payments from the other schools come from NIL donor collectives, groups of boosters and alumni who pool money to compensate athletes. There are 32 NCAA Division I basketball conferences. According to the online tracker NIL NCAA, at least one school in 29 of the conferences has an NIL basketball collective. The only outliers, the Northeast and Ohio Valley conferences, which are among the weakest in the nation in men's and women's basketball, and the Ivy League, which is not. I've talked on here before about the Ivy's sanctimonious exceptionalism. Here's the updated rundown. The league refused to grant all of its athletes an extra year of NCAA eligibility because of COVID. Dingle and Chris Ledlum, an ex-Harvard player who also transferred to St. John's, are petitioning the NCAA to overturn that decision. The league doesn't let grad students play, even if they still have eligibility, which is why more than 30 men's and women's basketball players who could have stayed with the additional COVID year are in the portal now. And it's why 3 Ivy grad transfers help lead USC's women's team on a deep tournament run. The league doesn't award athletic scholarships. As I discussed last year, it's being sued in federal court over that. And the league is opposing another effort to unshackle athletes. The Dartmouth men's basketball team's vote last month to form a union. The 8 Ivy schools have done little to help athletes secure NIL deals, at most creating the equivalent of bulletin boards where students can match up with potential sponsors, usually alumni. And they all appear to have informally or explicitly banned NIL collectives. Princeton's NIL guidelines state compensation continues to be prohibited for or as a direct result of participation in intercollegiate athletics, pay for play. According to a recent Washington Post story about Malik Mack, an attempt at Harvard last year to form an NIL collective died quickly and mysteriously. No other public efforts to form collectives have been reported, which, given the obscene wealth and sports connections of plenty of Ivy alumni, seems weird. I mean, Ivy athletic departments get millions in donations annually from rich ex-jocks or sports-loving alums. Brooklyn Nets owner and Yale lacrosse walk-on Joseph Tsai, class of 1986, recently funded a $13 million, 35,000 square foot lacrosse field house. Private equity billionaire and Philadelphia 76ers, New Jersey Devils, and Washington Commanders managing partner Josh Harris, Penn 86, gave $10 million to Wharton a few years ago. He could shake out his right front pocket to fund a Quakers basketball collective. So what's the problem? As that Harvard quote I read reflects, there's a long-standing belief among sports indifferent or even sports hostile Ivy administrations that the league's approach to athletics remains pure and principled, that we're better than our unscrupulous associates. It reminds me of the Looney Tunes cartoon where, after discovering that an apparently abandoned baby is actually grizzled bank robber Ant Hill Harry, aka Babyface Finster, Bugs Bunny shakes the cosplaying baby and says,
"How many times have I told you not to play with that dirty money?"
The Ivies also just might prefer to spend those millions in alumni gifts on new pools and tracks and not have money diverted to athletes. Whatever the reason, it's a con. Antiquated elitism with a dash of racism. Because when it comes to predominantly white, upper-middle-class sports, crew, lacrosse, fencing, field hockey, squash, whose athletes often can afford the full cost of attendance, the Ivies recruit to win national titles. The league's website boasts that it has showcased over 240 nationally ranked programs over the past 3 years. But giving the same scholarships and NIL money available at Duke or Stanford to a handful of predominantly black basketball players? Well, we can't have that now, can we? It could be reckoning time, though. Ivy coaches certainly aren't happy about losing their best players, and without NIL collectives, the departures are only going to increase. As Richard Kent, the lawyer, told me, you better believe there are some pissed off kids out there saying, my best friend is getting $125,000 and I'm better than this kid. Another lawyer I talked to said, the schools are committing suicide by not allowing this to happen. But you don't have to be Billy Beane or a Wharton MBA to identify the market inefficiency here. There are Ivy grapevine rumors of a basketball collective being organized at one school to stall transfers. The first Ivy that bucks its peers could dominate the league and make a run in the NCAAs. It could probably even recruit and retain players at a discount because there is actual appeal in the Ivy brand. And, oh, by the way, a national caliber team would generate more revenue, boost moribund Ivy sports school spirit, and actually do the modern and morally right thing for athletes who meet the league's academic standards, of whom there are plenty playing elsewhere. And if no school does the obvious, the quality of play will certainly deteriorate, but it'll also start to smell like collusion. And you know what that will mean? Another lawsuit seeking to force the NCAA's most elite institutions to pay their athletes what the market says they are worth.
That was great. You said at the top that, Brown beat Princeton. I remember that game. But also, I remember when Princeton made the Sweet 16 of the previous year's tournament. And I remember that a guy on that Princeton team led Northwestern to a win in this year's NCAA tournament, Ryan Langborg. So
yep.
I wonder how Princeton would have fared in this year's Ivy tournament or in the NCAAs. If that guy was still around, they probably wouldn't have lost to Brown.
No, they probably would not have. I mean, that guy had to leave because he had exhausted his Ivy League eligibility, and the Ivies, as I said, didn't give athletes a COVID year.
I wrote a piece at the time about Harvard and when they first hired Tommy Amaker, about them kind of going all in on basketball successfully for a minute, trying to, recruit better, win NCAA tournament games, and just how it made no sense to me that an institution with that amount of power and leverage, the endowment that it has, and I guess at that moment, the kind of moral authority, wouldn't just kiss off the NCAA and either build something better or different and more equitable, or just not try to compete at all. Like this kind of middle ground where they're playing ball with the NCAA, not taking any kind of leadership role, like leading from behind and doing worse by the athletes, is, I think, kind of the worst out of a bunch of options that would be way more palatable.
Yeah, it is the worst. And it is a mystery. And all I can assume is that there is this entrenched feeling that we can't go there, that we don't want to go there, that there isn't an appetite for us to go there. Because if you go there, it means you are going to compete against Duke and Stanford and Northwestern and whoever else. And some Ivy administrators must really believe that that's just not palatable.
That is all for this episode, but we've also got a bonus episode that's live right now. It's about Caitlin Clark being the number one pick in the WNBA draft, getting her own Nike shoe, and being subject to a very sexist comment from a columnist. To listen, subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangup plus to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available right now. We will see you over there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. And don't forget to subscribe and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. For Joel Anderson and Stefan Fatsis, I'm Josh Levin. Remember Zelmo Beatty, and thanks for listening.
At Bet365, we don't do ordinary. We believe that every sport should be epic. Every home run, every hit, every inning, every play. From the moments that are legendary to the ones that fly under the radar. See for yourself when you sign up today and get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. 21 plus only. Must be physically located in Virginia. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Terms and conditions apply.